Hello all, this is a video presentation on a concept in psychology called as Locus of Control, and this concept will help you navigate through uncertainty. You will see forms of this concept in Greek philosophy and also in certain religions. To give you a brief outline of what we will be doing in this presentation, first we will be trying to understand what this concept of Locus of Control is, and the factors involved in Locus of Control, to have an awareness of and management of emotions. Finally, we'll be integrating whatever we learn together so that we can apply it directly in our life. So very interesting thing about this concept, as I've mentioned before, that it is there in philosophy and religion. However, the challenge is in its application. When we read about this concept, after you learned about it in this presentation, you would notice that it is there in almost all of the religions and some of the schools of philosophy that you have read about. However, the problem arises in its application. That is where psychology comes in. We can use the principles of psychology to apply this particular principle derived from philosophy and or religion. Let us try and understand what locus of control is. Locus of control is the extent to which one feels in control over events in one's life. Many things happen in our life. Some things happen as a direct result of our actions. Some things happen which are not a direct result of our actions. There are two types of locus of control. One is called the internal locus of control and the other is called the external locus of control. So a person who has an internal locus of control believes that most of the things that happen in their life are controlled by their actions. Rather, if something happens in their life, they have the ability to change their aspect in their life through their actions. In external locus of control, people who have an external locus of control believe that the events that happen in their life is a result of a higher power or an external force. Maybe there are very few people who are entirely having an internal locus of control or who are entirely having an external locus of control. People with internal locus of control might say that everything in their life is in their control and everything is in their hands. Through their action they can change things in life. Whereas the person with external locus of control might say that things in life are already predetermined, or it is not in their control at all. Things are already decided. Things are working as per an external force. These are two extremes. Of course, with experience in life, we would realize that some things are in our control, some things are not in our control. But in general, it has been found that people with an internal focus of control tend to have a good mental health or a healthier way of going about things in life. Again, when I say people who have an internal locus of control, I mean that mostly towards internal locus of control and not entirely internal locus of control, because that would be a little idealistic to think that everything in life is happening because of you, right? So to understand this concept better and to apply this concept, let us look at the next slide in the presentation, which will make things a little easy for you. So here we have a spectrum of control. On one end you see things which are entirely in your control, where I have written entirely within my control, and on the other end there are things completely out of my control or completely out of your control, and in the middle you have the shades of grey, let's call it. So on one hand you have entirely within my control, more within my control than not, partially within my control, let's say 50%, more out of my control than within my control, and completely out of my control. Generally, things in our life lie in this spectrum. There are certain things entirely within our control, there are certain things completely out of our control. So, to live a healthy life, to be healthy mentally, to have a good mental health, we try to focus on things which are more in our control than which are entirely out of our control. I mean, for obvious reasons. If things are not in your control and then you go and try to control them, it's most likely not going to be in the way that you want them to be. Therefore, you're going to feel certain negative emotions such as anger or sadness. We blame and tend to get into all sorts of psychological circles in our head. So it is always better to focus on those things which are mostly in our control. So as a first step to apply this philosophy, if you want to call it, or to apply this concept in your life, is to first identify those things which are in this spectrum. So if you can look at your screen, if you're looking at your screen, then to first, if you can, to maybe write down or maybe to think about. Thinking is a starting point, writing is better, or to record it or to type it, whichever way you prefer. To note down the things which are entirely within your control. You have good amount of control over it. And then to note down those things which are more in your control than not. So something which is entirely within my control right now, maybe walk out of this room, or to take a pen and write things down. It is entirely in my control. I can move my hand, reach out, take a pen, bring it close, take a paper. Entirely in my control. More within my control than not. Maybe my pen and paper is with a friend of mine. I can ask him and take it. It's more within my control. I mean, if he doesn't give it, it doesn't usually happen, but if he doesn't give it, it is not in my control. But you get the drift of it. More within my control than not. Partially within my control, partially not within my control. Things that fall into that category. Let's say I'm preparing for an interview. It's partially within my control because I can study what I have to study, make my resume properly. But then the result is in the hands of the interviewer. How the interviewer would judge me in the interview, or it goes to the discretion of the interviewer. Because unless he provides a structure, but again, partially in the control of the interviewer, partially in the control in your own hands. Some things are more out of your control than within your control. You can find examples of that. Some things are completely out of your control. For instance, to predict that there will be a virus outbreak, that is completely out of our control, right? No one could have possibly predicted that there is going to be a virus and it is going to come from this particular region and it would soon turn from an epidemic to a pandemic. These things are completely out of our control. So if we were to focus on things which are completely out of our control, let's take the example of COVID-19, then we would be very sad for a very long time, because those were things which are completely out of our control. We could have never imagined. Maybe we could have imagined, but of course, to the fine details of it, where it would happen, how it would happen, but it is completely out of our control. We focus on that, we would feel bad. You can think of many examples where you have actually focused on things which are not in your control, to be accepted by somebody, or think of many of the times where you would expect life to go one way, but life went the other way, and now you are in a soup. You are wondering what happened. Why is life so unkind to me? It goes into blaming, and which is not really healthy. So that is why, as a first step, note down the things so that you are aware that these are the things in my control and this is where my focus should be. If your focus is there, then of course it's not that you would entirely be free of all the negative emotions. You will be anger free or sadness free. It is just that you would feel it to the level that is appropriate, and then you will get back on track. And we cannot entirely, of course, get rid of emotions. Probably not a good idea also if we find a way to. But then we will be more in control than not by focusing on those things which are more in our control, and to accept the things which are not in our control, because we really don't have a choice. So I hope you are doing the first step. So to give a much more clarity on this, and to give much more clarity on this first step, we go to the next slide, where we talk about the factors involved in locus of control. So here at the bottom, I have mentioned a few these broad factors, which are biological factors, psychological factors, social factors, economic factors, cultural factors, and time and environmental factors. When I say biological factors, there could be limitations. These are basically limitations, biological limitations that we have. Some people may be disabled, or some people may have a certain predisposition to stress or anxiety. So some people get more anxious than others just because of biological factors such as their brain chemistry, or genetically it has been inherited from their parents. So because of these reasons, there are certain limitations put biologically when we are born itself. So we have to acknowledge these limitations. So this kind of sets a limit on our control in certain areas of life. For example, if a person is slightly more predisposed to anxiety than others, maybe that person should avoid certain jobs that cause a lot of anxiety, that cause you to be hyper vigilant. Maybe it is not for them, because biologically, of course, there is a certain limitation. It does not always mean that you have to, but generally when you have a certain limitation biologically, it's good to go with how you are rather than an imagined version of yourself where you're like, no, I will be free of all these limitations. From a reality point of view, you would be able to assess it. And then psychological limitations. For instance, if a person has a certain traumatic experience, that creates a certain psychological limitation on the person, at least till the point they seek help for it, seek counseling or psychotherapy sessions, wherein they are able to make sense of this traumatic event and then move on from it. Psychologically, some people may avoid going to certain places or avoid certain situations. When I say psychological, it means certain thoughts or beliefs that they have prevents them from taking certain actions or not doing something. So these are psychological limitations that people might have. Can be as complex as a traumatic experience, and it can be as simple as being more of an introvert and avoiding social situations. Maybe it can be anywhere. And then there could be social factors. At any given point of time, maybe a person does not have the relevant social skills to socialize with people, and therefore they may not have as many friends as they would like. But here again, I'm emphasizing at any given point of time, because social skills are something that can be learnt. So at that point of time, a person may not have that skill. So at that point of time, they have a certain limitation. There is a certain limitation in their control. So maybe because they don't have that amount of social skills, they may not be able to socialize well. But what is within their control is that they can learn it. Once they learn it, in the process of learning, they can maybe expose themselves more confidently in social situations. So time is an important factor in all of these. And there could be economic limitations. Maybe I want to study in a top university. It is thousands of kilometers away, and to get there I would require financial assistance. And at this point of time, I may not have that financial support or a job. So therefore, economic limitations come into picture. So again, at this point of time is an important factor. This person may not have the money, but what is in their control is over time, in a given period of time, they may be able to make that money by focusing on those things which are in their control, to get a job or do a part-time job or whatever is there in their control, to earn that money and then go to that place, or to maybe look at a college or a university closer by, study there, or a school closer by, study there for some time till they can get a job, and then go for their initial goal of that top university, whichever way. But the idea is economic limitations, and there could be cultural limitations. Culture imposes many things on people, and sometimes people agree to certain norms of the culture, or they agree to the ways of the culture, and that itself sometimes create a limitation on the people. A more collectivistic culture, like most cultures in India and Japan, have certain limitations in comparison to certain individualistic cultures, say European cultures or American cultures, how they are. So that is why a cultural conflict happens, because people don't understand the ways of the other culture. So that in itself can create a sort of limitation. Or it could just be a person who is struggling in a family who is predominantly a patriarchal culture, and at that given point of time they may not have the financial backing to be more independent, to move out of the family. So at that point of time it is not really in their control to move out. So it is better that they focus on what is in their control to get what they need. Maybe it's financial support, or to get a job and have a stable a salary, or earn some money that would give them certain financial independence, which would allow them to move to a different culture or adapt to that culture by behaving according to their culture, whichever way. The choice is of course up to the individual. So there are cultural limitations put on the person that affects the control. Of course, one could go against the culture, or one could adapt to the culture. That is entirely up to the person. And there are environmental factors that affect a person. It could be in the form of a physical barrier to get from point A to point B, or it could be a natural disaster. A person could be stuck in the airport because of bad weather conditions. It is an environmental factor. They are wearing a mask for to prevent spreading of virus, but people also wear a mask to not be affected by pollution, to prevent lung diseases in cities where there is a lot of pollution. So that is an environmental barrier. So you adapt to these barriers by wearing a mask, but these are limitations put on us. So our control is limited. At a certain point of time, there are certain limitations put on the person. It can also be interpreted as in a given point of time, you don't have control over a situation or an event, but in a different time, you might have a lot more control over it. For example, a child may not have as much as freedom as an adult, but as the child grows up and becomes an adult, immediately the level of freedom changes. So the responsibility also changes, but from time to time, our control changes. Even as an adult, as a person switches jobs or gets into a position of power, this person's control over certain areas in life also changes. As a person grows, because of their awareness, their control over themselves can also change. Therefore, time also is an important factor which kind of decides how much control a person has over things in their life. So with this, we will stop our video presentation here. In the next part of it, we will be talking about the emotional aspects of it, about awareness of emotion and how we can regulate emotion. Thank you from me to all of you for this part of the video. See you in the next part of the video.